Welcome to week 7 of our course, where we're going to be studying the 17th century art in Europe, or the Baroque art period. As we look at the map of Europe this week, we'll notice that we're going to kind of step all over Europe. We're going to start in Italy, we'll go up into the Benelux countries, we'll look in France and Spain, and see what artists are doing, and what the topics of their paintings are, and who their patrons are. At this period in the 17th century, Protestantism is still contending for power and is still growing. The Roman Catholic Church participates in what we know as the Counter-Reformation to try to draw some of the people that were drawn away during Protestant development back into the Roman Catholic Church. We also see a split in the Habsburg Empire, and with separate rulers, we see kind of a loss of economy or economic power, but also then a loss of power and perceived power with those rulers. And so what's going to happen when those rulers don't have as much economic pull? Artists will return to the church, the Roman Catholic Church, as patrons of much of the art that goes on during this Baroque time period. As you can read on the slide, there are lots of things going on in Italy during the 17th century. Baroque art is going to be the most important art that we're going to look at during this time period. And it really evokes an emotional response from viewers. Many artists will do portraiture, some will do some genre, we'll see still lifes coming, but we're also going to see a continuation of religious scenes. With the Counter-Reformation of the Roman Catholic Church, we will see a draw back to the church from some artists. But the role of the viewer at this time really changes. And the artists will engage viewers as participants in the artwork as they reach beyond the framework of the artwork in painting, as they reach into the space of the viewer for architecture and sculpture. This is a great view of St. Peter's Basilica and the piazza that is in front of that at the Vatican. The beginning of the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church goes out and tries to embellish and update many of the churches, putting new facades and grander piazzas in front of each church in Rome. This building program nearly bankrupted the Roman Catholic Church, but Pope Sixtus really believed that this would help draw people back to the church. Bernini is employed as the architect of the colonnade. So what you see in the piazza is you see two kind of straight arms reaching out, and then it becomes a colonnade. The colonnade of oval shape is actually 4 different colonnades, and it's brilliantly done. And it represents the reaching arms of the Mother Church, reaching out to invite and to comfort the members of the Roman Catholic Church. Bernini is also employed by Pope Urban VIII to design a bronze baldacchino or canopy over the altar of St. Peter's, inside of St. Peter's. This is based on Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and it is covered with many different emblems that actually are part of the Pope's family, the Barberini family, specifically honeybees, suns, and laurel leaves. Each of these are done. You can see from the description of this slide that it is over 100 feet tall and done in bronze. It is a masterful piece, and you can see in the picture the scale of people walking or standing in the basilica and looking at this baldacchino to see the scale of what's going on. Again, this is an idea to bring back the glories of the church. Here we're looking at a sculpture by Bernini. He does the architecture, but he also is a sculptor. And here he does in marble a David figure. David is doing something that is different. David is reaching forward and leaning into our space as a viewer and taking space by that outstretched back leg. This composition is very active And Bernini is absolutely trying to show the moment that has the most heightened drama for this scene of David and Goliath. If we go back and compare this David of Bernini's to Verrocchio's David, done in bronze in Florence in the 15th century, and you can see in the background there, Donatello's first nude of the Renaissance, a little out of focus, but you can still see it. Compare these to each other and think about the moment that the artist has chosen to show his main figure. For both Donatello and Verrocchio, it is after the event. David stands victorious over the head of Goliath, having removed it or chopped off the head. But in Bernini, we are in the middle of the action. David looks very intently at his target, has a stone in his sling, and is in the process of winding and letting go of that sling. Very different moments of time, and the second with Bernini is very appropriate for the Baroque. Here's another piece by Bernini. He does this as part of a chapel. This is Saint Teresa in Ecstasy. The complex, theatrical interplay of what's going on, though, is far above just a simple sculpture. The main sculpture you can see in the center with an angel and a reclining Saint Teresa with rays of light coming down from the sky. To the right and left, the artist also includes galleries, and those are sculptures of the patrons in the galleries right and left, and also includes painting above the sculpture to create this very spiritual location with angels and the Holy Spirit and God being able to participate in this event. Let's look at a detail of St. Teresa. Here's the detail of the piece by Bernini. Here you see an angel holding an arrow that is going to pierce the breast. And so the angel pulls back the drapery ever so gently from St. Teresa, who is clearly in a different type of state. This is a state of ecstasy where St. Teresa is receiving a revelation from God. We are meant to participate in this as viewers. We are drawn into with the drapery. It unfolds. We step up all the way to St. Teresa. We see her face, and we see the angel. And we see the line of sight between the angel and St. Teresa, but we also, that is emphasized by the arrow that the angel holds and will be piercing her breast with. We also have the rays of light. And if you notice, there seems to be a natural light above those rays. And actually that is incorporated with the artist, took a window from the outside and actually incorporated the light coming in naturally so that those rays of light are lit. It's a beautiful piece. And when you see it in person, you are completely drawn into the scene, trying to understand and to see all the way around the piece, the clues that are there to help you understand what St. Teresa, how glorious this is for her. The ordered classicism of the Carracci rejected the artifice of the Mannerist style that we saw coming out of Italy, with the extenuated legs and arms, body parts. And instead, the Carracci focus on line, composition, and solid figures. So we return to those really good Renaissance established characteristics. The Carracci include brothers and their cousins as well in this high Renaissance style, and they actually become masters of painting ceilings. What we're looking at here is the ceiling gallery in the Palazzo Farnese, which is done in Rome. It takes about 4 years to get this done, but we see different complex stories about Ovid from the Metamorphosis. And so we see a typical scene where the artists are turning to mythology and showing scenes, but using illusion at the same time, because as we look up into the sky, we're having that dramatic effect that we saw starting with as early as Michelangelo. But in this case, the stories are more dramatic, and they invite us into the scenes with color, with action, and with emotion. Let's look at the artist Caravaggio. Caravaggio is known for his naturalism and with his use of light and dark. He uses this idea of tenebrism, chiaroscuro. And we'll talk about that as we look at a few other different pieces. Here you're looking at a Bacchus, which may be a self-portrait of the artist, but it looks like an invitation, and it looks kind of like a sensual or erotic invitation. This is one of the things that Caravaggio, who had an alternative lifestyle, was criticized by the Roman Catholic Church, even though he will spend a lot of his career painting very biblical scenes. But because of his lifestyle, during his life, he was not accepted as a great artist, even though we can see a wonderful use of foreshortening. We can see his ability to do still life. We can see his ability to show wine in different glass vessels. We can see his ability to do figure and anatomy, and we can also see his ability to do portrait with both the attention to face and hands. He has all of the parts of an artist, but because of his lifestyle, many rejected him, and do to this day. It's not until a retrospective in the 20th century that Caravaggio is really accepted as a great leader in the Baroque. Here's another piece in a chapel by Caravaggio, and the piece I want to look at is to the left. This is the Calling of St. Matthew. In this, there are 3 different large oil paintings. Let's look at the one to the left. Here's the Calling of St. Matthew. Using the window and the light from the window, we have this dramatic streak of bright, intense light coming across. Right at the bottom edge of the light, we see the head and halo of the Christ figure, who reaches his arm out, very much like Michelangelo's God figure in the creation of Adam, and points to Matthew, who was a tax collector at the time. And Matthew, in turn, points to himself and is like, "Oh, you're calling me?" And so we have this moment where Christ is calling his disciples. Christ is accompanied by Peter, who is wearing blue and yellow, which is typical. They are seen in robes, where the people at the table are seen in typical 17th century costume. It's an important thing where we continue this idea of the sacred conversation, where we can be drawn into the figures, and we're brought in because of the familiarity that we have with the clothing, but perhaps even the location in an inn. I love this piece with the use of light that Caravaggio does. He has this bright streaking light that he uses as a compositional element. And Matthew's face and those of the people around him are beautiful portraits. We can see that the artist in oil knows how to paint, and he knows how to show us texture as well as the ideas of portrait and gesture. Great piece. Here's another piece by Caravaggio. This is the Conversion of St. Paul, sometimes referred to as the Equestrian Conversion. St. Paul, on his way to Damascus, encounters a vision and falls off his horse. And so we're seeing the moment where he has fallen off his horse and is receiving the vision. Again, very important in the Baroque that we're in the drama, the heightened drama, right where St. Paul is receiving his vision. The horse takes up a lot of space. And when you see this piece, at least the first time I saw it, I was attracted more to the horse. And then I realized that there was red going on down at the bottom. And then I saw the person. So it took me a little bit of time because the horse is beautifully done, beautifully painted, and takes up so much space. But it also kind of creates a tension between which is more important. The vision, where we see these dramatic arms raised, and you can see the light on the inside of the palms. I love that piece, and how it brightens St. Paul as he's on the ground. The artist did have, as I mentioned earlier, the way he lived his life was a great controversy. But we also know that he had a temper, and he was accused of killing someone during a tennis match, which is an interesting little, at least we know we have activity and things like that going on. But again, all of those things, what he emphasizes in the piece, the way he lived his life, the fact that he was accused of murder, all of those things play into the fact that the artist is not accepted by his contemporaries. But I'm here to tell you that Caravaggio has a great influence on people to come, including Peter Paul Rubens. You're looking at a piece of Judith beheading Holofernes, which is done by a female artist, Artemisia Gentileschi. Here, we see a very Caravaggio influence. Dramatic, yes. Where the scenes are, yes. Pushed forward, yes. All of those things are occurring, and really it's Caravaggio that is bringing that forward. So even though the respected patrons may not have appreciated him, his fellow artists did. We know that Artemisia studied with her father in Rome, and typically shows females being heroic, and here is one of those scenes. But it's also pretty grotesque. If you want to take the Baroque to the really at the drama of the event, this is it, when the beheading is actually occurring. And here, Judith actually is in the middle of that activity and is being helped by Holofernes, is being held down by her maidservant. Great use of color. In this particular case, the primary colors of yellow, red, and blue. And again, this brilliant idea of use of light. And where is the dramatic light coming from? What does it brighten? What does it disclose? And that idea of bright brights and light and dark darks is really an interesting piece of the Baroque. Look for it when you're looking at different paintings. Look at where the scene or the activity actually comes into our space as viewers, that his head is coming off. And where's it going to go? It's going to come into our space as a viewer. And so that idea of how we engage the viewer is also pretty important. Let's turn our attention now to Spain, where we see the end, really, of the Habsburg Empire here. They're losing power. Different parts of their empire are gaining independence. And we're going to move forward, and we're going to see that the drama of the Baroque from Italy is going to continue here, but it's going to feel different in Spain. Here's the artist Diego Velázquez, who's one of the most brilliant artists from this time period. And this is his Water Carrier of Seville. Very well-known figure, but not noble, not a king, but is shown in such a beautiful way, very tender. Love the face, and I love the hands of this figure. And I love that he reaches forward and holds touches this very earthen face. He takes up space. There's drama, there's tension going on. But this model really symbolizes ordinary people and tells us that the work that ordinary people do is important. Diego Velázquez did become the official court painter for Philip IV until his death in 1660. Here we're looking at a historic event, the surrender at Breda. And this really is very typical of Italian pieces. We see the use of spears and of that are lining up kind of lines of sight for us. We see horses that are part of this. Again, that rear end of that horse, much like Caravaggio. But here we have the surrender, we have that meeting, we're surrounded by people that are involved in this, not only noblemen, but also the common person, the soldier that would have been there. And so we see this as kind of a triumph. It's a kind of a political piece, if you will. We have the exchange of pleasantries, and then we're going to sign this peace treaty. Here the composition is also pretty vital to us. We have what is established with the two figures in the center, a nice pyramid, and then that is extended, and we're invited with the spears to look into the distance. And we can see the end of war. We can see fire and smoke as it's arising. And we can see a great use of the artist to put things in the foreground, and we have a background. There's not much going on in the middle ground, if you will. And that tends to be something that seems to be a fairly Baroque characteristic. Here's a great painting by Velázquez of the king's daughter, the infant Margareta, and very interesting piece. Lots of controversy on exactly what everything means in this piece. What I've done is I've attached here a Khan Academy video, which I think the art historians do a great job pointing out lots of different features of this, and I invite you to watch that. Let's turn our attention to some of the parts of Spain that are in different locations, specifically Flanders. There's rebellion in the Spanish Empire. The northern part of the provinces, the Netherlands, gain independence during the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. Flanders, because of their connection with the Catholic Church, will stay under direct rule of the Spanish. Let's look at a couple of different artists here, particularly Rubens and Van Dyck. Let's turn our attention to the work of Peter Paul Rubens, who typifies the Flemish Baroque style. Rubens visited every major city in Italy, and then returned to Antwerp to accept the position of the court painter to a Habsburg regent in Flanders. This painting is of that regent and his wife, Isabella Brandt. The commission was actually given within 10 days of him returning. Beautiful portrait. He shows the regent and his wife both seated, showing the typical dress of the day. We can see the surrounding of nature with not only the tree, but also the flowers in the bottom, very typical of the north. And we see a very low horizon line just actually under the coat of the regent. Peter Paul Rubens' first major commission in Antwerp is the Raising of the Cross triptych. Again, center panel, two wings. This is done for one of the churches in Antwerp. And it is just so cool in how it stretches the action in this very definite diagonal across the middle of the painting. And then we can see those things extended into the two wings. We see the echo of the lean in the woman down to the left with her baby, and we see the horse actually pulling away, actually almost to make room for the man in the center panel who's pulling on the cross to pull it up. Very interesting use of dramatic line, but also look at how Rubens continues to use the idea of light lights and dark darts. Everything is pushed forward to us again, very typical of the Baroque, and especially coming out of Italy. We see most of the action going on in the foreground. Beautiful use of anatomy, and we can see Peter Paul Rubens is a very skilled artist with that, also with expression, so that we can see not only the gestures, but also the faces of the people as this event is going on. Here again, I have attached a Khan Academy video so that you can learn more about Marie de Medici and her husband Henry IV. This is only one of 20 different panels that Peter Paul Rubens does. But watch the link. I think you'll enjoy it. The last piece I want to look at from Peter Paul Rubens is Prometheus Bound. I think it's really interesting that Peter Paul Rubens brings in a fellow artist who paints the large eagle that is pecking at Prometheus' liver. Look at the use of the way the talons of the eagle are spread on Prometheus's head and lower abdomen, and how the wings are outstretched, exaggerating that very strong diagonal moving from the lower right to the upper left. First, we have Prometheus with the light skin doing that, kind of stretching out his feet, but gathering in the pain. But that is continued past the eagle's wing and into the tree that helps us establish that very dramatic moment. And this is clearly the moment where the eagle is eating the liver of Prometheus. So again, pushed into the foreground, coming at us as the viewer, and very, very dramatic moment. Anthony van Dyck is associated with Rubens as a specialist in painting heads. Charles I at the Hunt portrays the king truthfully, being short, as he was, but we have the horse bowing to him. The servants are behind the horse and lower than the king. Even the tree seems to bend over and pay homage to the king. So brilliantly done, not over-exaggerating who the king was, but certainly taming the elements around the king and being done as a great portrait. Again, we know it's northern, the horizon line is very low, and we have a beautiful study in clouds and nature. Clara Peters is a female artist who is known for her still lifes. And here we see in this particular one, typical foods natural for a family that emphasize not only the texture of the objects, but also the variety of things people would have, from the pottery to the metalwork to the glass to the flowers, and then the different varieties of nuts and fruits and breads. Beautifully done. Again, though, it is pushed forward on that table. In fact, the one plate and some of the flour are actually leaning off the table. But we are kind of taken back as the viewer, but clearly involved in this. Perhaps we're even reaching out and eating some of these things. Brilliantly done. Let's go north of Flanders now into the Dutch Republic. We'll see in the Dutch paintings that we're going to look at that they have a tendency to show their own history. They show some mythology, some science, and some exploration into other places of the world. Frans Hal is a portrait painter. In this particular piece, he is doing a group portrait of the officers of the Haarlem militia. And he takes individual portraits and tries to then group them into a very connected piece. But you can see a real strong diagonal moving from left to right with the emphasis on the flag as it's going up to the right. Here people are together, not only with their clothing, but in physical proximity, but we still get the sense that these are individual portraits. So we have some way to go. But it is something that's important to the Dutch, and we will see this tradition continue. I get really excited by this portrait by Frans Hal of Ma Babe. And here you see a woman from a bar holding a tankard with a bird on her shoulder. I don't know if that's supposed to be an owl who's supposed to be wise, but here this woman has character, is laughing, and it's just this great portrait. It's done very, very quickly. You can still see you can see the crazy brushstrokes going on, not only in the background, but on the main figure's lace collar and in the clothing. I just love the expression on the face, and I love that it's pushed forward to us. We have some symbols here and some other things going on. It almost looks like I could reach out and grab that and take a drink with her as I move forward. Great piece, very, very quick brushstroke. Judith Leister, on the other hand, is a little bit more refined in her portrait style. Here we're looking at a self-portrait, while very happy with a great face, and we see the violinist in the background of the painting that she's painting while she's painting a self-portrait of herself. Both look very happy, and so we get that jovial, common person thing. But at the same time, we see an artist who uses the oil to its advantage to show us face and hands and allows us to see what a portrait can be as we move forward. Rembrandt is probably one of the most notable artists from this time period in this area. Very, very Caravaggio style. And in this piece, The Anatomy Lesson from Dr. Tulp, we see a moment where the doctor is instructing other doctors or doctoral students. And so we get to see this anatomy lesson, okay? But also, this is a group portrait. Just like we saw with Frans Hal, we have the portraits of several different individuals, but they are put in a situation where a group portrait makes sense. And so, and this one may be a little bit more connected, although there are still, to me, a couple of figures that are just kind of stuffed there rather than all involved in the same scene. Rembrandt takes this group portrait to a new level when he does this piece, sometimes referred to as the Night Watch. And he takes the group portrait to the dramatic moments, right? Here we see a girl in the crowd carrying a chicken. We can, with some other things going on, there's some puns and things going on with that, but we see gestures and groups of different members of this company as we're getting ready for a battle. Rembrandt popularized etching, which is an intaglio technique that carves designs out of the surface of the print plate. The metal is coated with an acid resin and then scratched into. Dry point is another intaglio technique in which a sharp needle directly scratches the metal. In this piece, The Three Crosses, he does various stages or states of the work. And when we see these in print, we can actually see the work that the artist does. So here you're looking at first state, and now we look at the fourth state, and we start to see how the burnishing of the metal and the use of the material is being doctored and changed and worked, a little bit like Leonardo da Vinci would have done in his cartoons or sketches prior to work. Rembrandt has an incredible talent with drawing and with etching, and we can see his economy of drawing very few strokes that inform us as to what's going on. Love looking at pieces that are done, the prints that are done by Rembrandt. As Rembrandt ages, we see a use of different colors. This is a self-portrait of him, but you can see the darkness. That's that chiaroscuro. You can see that the artist sits forward in dramatic dress, very colorful, and is pushed to the foreground, which is very Baroque. In this particular piece, it's almost psychological. He's brought us in as the viewers to look at who he is, and almost invites, with his open stance here, us to consider who he is and what type of person he is. And so this idea of getting to the psychology, bringing the viewer in, is starting to come out in the Baroque. Johannes Vermeer produced fewer than 40 canvases, but the things that he did produce are so structured and so beautiful that he is considered one of the major artists of this time period. Here we're looking at a view of Delft that shows the stability of what goes on. We believe that Vermeer may have used a camera obscura in this particular piece where light would have been allowed through a small hole to have an image, and then he would have painted it from the image. But we also know that some of the pieces, buildings that is, have been moved. And so you see this sense of scale, you see this idea of the cityscape. Again, think about where the horizon line is, and we're really kind of getting a study of the clouds in this landscape. Vermeer's Woman Holding a Balance is also a beautiful piece, and I have attached here a reading by two art historians of this piece from the Khan Academy. Van Rysdale also paints landscapes of the north here. Here we're looking at one that showcases this love of landscape, but has a church in the background, which may give us some indication of what's going on. But the Dutch, with their closeness to water, tend to connect to not only the landscape or the seascape, but also have these interesting religious connections to things like Noah's flood, rainbows, and what goes on in the sky. Real interesting. Beautifully done. You can see the light coming through the clouds and highlighting different parts of the landscape as we move into the distance of where the church in the background is. Here's a great piece by Rachel Roush. Again, I've attached a Khan Academy video so that you can look at the beautiful still lifes of this artist. She is sought all over Europe to do beautiful still lifes of flowers. Let's move now to France and what goes on in France during this time period with the absolute monarchy that has been established. And we have the beginnings of the Royal Academy. Great piece here, portrait of Louis, and you can see Louis in the stockings and the robes, velvet and satin, curtains. Very, very dramatic. But again, look at this in terms of where is the king standing. He's pushed all the way into the foreground to look at us. While we continue to have this idea that we are interested in texture and symbols, we see the crown in the background, we see the baton of ruling, we see the sword in its scabbard, we see the coat of Valois, the fleur-de-lis over everything. We see these things, and we're taken by the ability of the artist to be able to do the texture. That's continuing in tradition. But the idea of making this very dramatic with the way the red and gold curtains above the king and to the sides frame the king and bring us this energy. This is a dramatic moment, as if the king has just put his arm up and up on his hip and out with the baton. It's very interesting to look at it in that way as the dramatic moment. And then at the same time, we as the viewer are brought into the piece to see the king. Kind of a sacra conversazione if you think about it. Another artist from France, Georges de la Tour, very influenced by Caravaggio. And we can see this done with, here's Mary Magdalene with the smoking flame. Is it really Mary Magdalene? Well, maybe. We see a girl of some, and she's holding symbols, the symbol of Golgotha, where Christ would have been crucified, looking into a flame, which is very interesting. And I always wonder if this is more of a study of the light or of the religious symbol. Very interesting. The figure is pushed again to the foreground. We're drawn in by the intense bright light, and then things are disclosed, and we have to look into the darkness to understand things. The artist Nicolas Poussin continues the tradition of classical landscape, where he puts figures in that tell us a story. This particular one comes from the Bible, or, well, maybe not exactly from the Bible, but this is supposed to be Matthew being inspired by an angel to write the Gospel of Matthew, but is set in a classical surrounding and in a beautiful landscape. This is part of a 2-painting series that Poussin was commissioned to do, one on St. Matthew and the other of St. John. Here's the landscape that Poussin does with St. John on the island of Patmos, where he receives the book of Revelation. But again, in both of these two pieces, the St. Matthew and the St. John, we have a classical landscape, very, very controlled foreground, midground, background. Even though the main character is in the foreground, in this case, St. John, we do see St. John in a beautiful landscape that would have been very accepted by the French Academy. Along with Poussin, Claude Lorraine also paints very classic landscapes. In this particular one, we're looking at a piece, it's just a pastoral one where we have some shepherds and we see their animals. Very interesting, we see the city in the distance, and it kind of meanders. We move from right where the figures are to the left, seeing the animals. We see the bridge, we move back over, and then we see the city and we meander back. And the trees in this particular case help push us to where the city is. Interesting use of the idea to get us to where the city is as opposed to where nature is. Let's move now to England. We're going to see the English king, James VI of Scotland, who brings England and Scotland together for a short period of time. And we want to pay attention to the architect Christopher Wren. Christopher Wren was a mathematician from Oxford that is called in to actually redesign much of the building that is lost during the Great Fire of 1666. And I want specifically to look at his designs for St. Paul's Cathedral. Here you're looking at a kind of a cutaway view and also an extended floor plan view of the interior of the cathedral. Christopher Wren thinks of this as the basilica, which you definitely see. The transept has very short arms, but he wants to bring the classical style back. And so we see this combination of the Roman basilica, the long building, and along with colonnades. And then when we move to the exterior, we see kind of a Roman temple front, which is very interesting. He enjoyed the spaces. He wanted to create large spaces with colonnades, and he does that successfully in this particular space. Here's the facade of St. Paul's Cathedral. Again, you can see that Roman temple front where we step up into the temple. We have a two-tier, the bottom and then the top with the pediment. And beyond that, Christopher Wren uses the idea of the towers that we start to see developing in the Gothic time period, and then then we see in the backwards, the dome, which is raised up on and created as a circular temple on top of the basilica, which is the church. Very interesting use of different architectural elements here. And it's very, very large. You can see that from the scale of the people walking in. But really, really interesting when you're there on this property. It's actually a pretty small property that the church sits on. But as you walk around, you can see how the architect has used shadow and light to kind of continue that idea of chiaroscuro, where we have dark darks and light lights. Very interesting use and a great place to go and visit. I hope that you've enjoyed looking at several different artists from the Baroque time period, the 17th century in Europe. And I hope that you will watch those Khan Academy videos with the art historians that actually kind of walk through and read paintings for us. It's great to have a different kind of approach and to hear different voices. This week, what I'd like you to do is to really look at the different pieces. And I want you to consider these artists as either artists that are painting conventionally, following the style of other artists of their time period, or if they are adding innovation. What are they bringing? Something new, a new technique, a new use of something. Are they conventional or are they innovative? And when you do that, I'd like you to post on the discussion board one of your favorite pieces and then talk about its convention or innovation.